Call the regular meeting of the Upshur County Commission to order. We'll begin with a moment of silent meditation and prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time we'll have the reading of the minutes of the November 14th, 2013 meeting. Good morning, Jackie.
Good morning. The County Commission of Upshur County, West Virginia held their regular meeting at the Courthouse Annex on Thursday, November 14, 2013 at 9 a.m. Donnie Tenney called the meeting to order. There were present Donnie Tenney, Commissioner, J.C. Rafferty, Commissioner, Troy Brady, Commissioner, Megan Pomeroy, County Administrator, Jennifer Dinklow, Assistant County Administrator, and Jacqueline Dinklocker, Secretary. The meeting began with a moment of silent meditation and prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. All motions passed unanimously unless otherwise stated. After reading of the minutes on motion by J.C. Rafferty, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved the regular meeting minutes of October 31, 2013 as submitted. After discussion on motion by J.C. Rafferty, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved and authorized the President to sign the West Virginia Certified Development Community Program Resolution of Participation. The resolution is a pledge of support for industrial and economic development and the community through the Upshur County Development Authority, and reflects the commitment of the Upshur County to participate in economic development programs. After discussion on motion by Troy Brady, seconded by J.C. Rafferty, the Commission approved and authorized the Commission to sign the approval for the number of election officials and election commissioners for the February 8, 2014 school levy election. After discussion on motion by J.C. Rafferty, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved and authorized the Commission to sign the approval for the number of sets of emergency absentee voting commissioners for the February 8, 2014 school levy election. After discussion on motion by Troy Brady, seconded by J.C. Rafferty, the Commission approved payment of $15,000 to Helen Phillips, Upshur County Assessor, for additional duties as delineated in West Virginia Code 7-7-6A. After discussion on motion by Troy Brady, seconded by J.C. Rafferty, the Commission approved and authorized the President to sign the commercial lease amendment by and between Q4 Holdings as landlord and the Lewis Upshur Braxton Community Corrections as tenant, effective December 1, 2013, in the amount of $800 per month. The amended lease agreement replaces the agreement dated June 27, 2013. After discussion on motion by J.C. Rafferty, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission approved and authorized the President to sign the West Virginia Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management Non-Disclosure Agreement. The agreement concerns Miss Utility County Service Grid data sets. Megan Pomeroy provided a review of the Governor's Community Participation Grant Program contract for project number 13 LEDA 00712 in the amount of $4,000 for the benefit of Banks District Volunteer Fire Department for the purchase of equipment. After discussion on motion by Troy Brady, seconded by J.C. Rafferty, the Commission approved and authorized the President to sign the grant contract and all related documents. After discussion on motion by Troy Brady, seconded by J.C. Rafferty, the Commission approved the resignation of Jacqueline Tenney as full-time E911 Communications Center dispatcher, effective November 1, 2013. After discussion on motion by Troy Brady, seconded by J.C. Rafferty, the Commission approved the employment of Brittany Nicole Morgan as full-time fire fee clerk, effective December 2, 2013, at the rate of $9 per hour. Donnie Tenney and Megan Pomeroy reviewed the following for your information items. Number 1, notice of election to authorize continuation of the additional levies for fiscal year 2014 through 2018. General current expenses of the public schools in Upshur County, West Virginia. Number 2, correspondence from United States Department of Commerce, suspension of the 2014 boundary and annexation survey. Number 3, Regional Jail Authority statement for October 2013 for $58,093. Number 4, review of the quitclaim deed process for Paper Street per request from Bennett Surveying. Number 5, Upshur County Building Permit Report, October 2013. Number 6, Upshur County Dog Warden Report, October 2013. Number 7, Upshur County Cat Report, October 2013. Number 8, Upshur County Communication Center Reports, October 2013, as listed. Number 9, agendas and/or notices of meetings as listed. Number 10, meeting minutes and/or financial reports as listed. Number 11, meetings as listed. And number 12, appointments needed or upcoming as listed. The Commission approved all invoices for payment. The Commission approved all vacation orders. The Commission approved the following settlements as listed. The Commission approved the following exonerations and/or refunds as listed. The Commission approved the following requests for time out of office as for Commission employees as listed. The Commission approved the following consolidation of land tracts as listed. The Commission recessed at 11 a.m. The Commission attended the meeting of the Upshur County Department Supervisors at 1 p.m. The Commission attended the meeting of the Upshur County Policy Board at 2 p.m. The Commission reconvened at 3:55 p.m. Helen Phillips appeared before the Commission to discuss assessment concerns. With no further business, on motion by J.C. Rafferty, seconded by Troy Brady, the Commission meeting adjourned at 4:15 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes as read? If not, I'll ask for a motion to be approved as such.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. All right, well, it's 9:10, and we have Mr. Steve Holmes, an Upshur County resident, concerning floodplain issues. If you'd like to step up to the podium, Steve, we will address your concern.
Well, my concern revolves around a letter from the county asking us to stop filling a drainage pond that was constructed under a permit granted to Maple Moss LLC out in and around the area where ADS, now IAAI, and the Upshur County Cinema, and the behind Bill Minsker's property. We were trying to, when the permit was finished, we were told to fill the pond. Well, it's no longer needed for that development. Evidently, someone has said that that's a problem, and it's within a floodplain, and we have to have a county permit to do so. My point has been that that floodplain determination map provided by FEMA is very, very incorrect. And that property was granted that permit to fill and has filled all except the drainage pond over the years. And that we should not have to get a permit to comply with filling that mosquito-ridden pond, which is within a dike that's above the floodplain level. And I'm asking that we not have to acquire a permit, just continue to fill the pond. That's all we're doing is filling the pond. Everything on the other side of that dike is in the floodplain, and there's even one small area of about, it used to be 1.12 acres of land that was designated as wetlands. When Minsker bought a little slice of that from us, he was granted the permission to fill that wetland without replacement because it was less than 10% of the amount of the wetlands. And we know that if we do anything on the other side of that dike, we're going to have to get a permit, and we have to have wetlands, trade wetlands for wetlands, and get the applicable federal permits and the local permit.
When was the initial permit?
I don't have a copy of it. Dave Rexroth has that, and unfortunately he's in Florida or somewhere. He was on a cruise the last time I tried to reach him. It was done, Maple Moss was granted that permit back in the 90s. It was designed by MSES out of Clarksburg. And we carried that on after we bought it in 2000.
It was issued by the State Department of environmental protection?
Yes, it was an EPA permit to fill.
Well-
It was prior to the current regulation imposed, I guess, by the county. And I think Terry has a copy of that map, and if you look at it,
Joe, why
you'll...
don't you,
Pardon me?
I asked Terry Joe to explain the situation from your perspective on that.
Okay. I do have a copy of the map here. It is.
Okay.
Provide you guys so that you can see it as we're talking about it. This right here is the cinemas. This right here is the pond that Mr. Holmes is speaking about. As
This-
you can see, all of that area that there is in the blue, FEMA does show to be in the flood zone.
When was this map created?
2010 were when those maps were revised and provided to Upshur County Commission.
And I'll also submit to you that the FEMA map was designed based on the elevations of the last topo map prior to any fill, prior to any change. That was done back in the late 60s, when that was still a pasture field that flooded, backed up from the river. And as you can see, all of ADS's cars are in the blue. The theater is in the blue, and all of Bill Minsker's lot, every bit of it, is supposed to be in the floodplain, none of which is.
The only thing that I would like to add to that is, I don't know if you can really tell it on that map per se, but if you look around the edge of that darker blue, there is a lighter blue line. The darker blue shows to be an approximate A zone, which means there was no studies done to determine base flood elevations. The lighter line, which is underneath it, is an AE zone, which shows that base flood elevations have been determined by FEMA. So there has been a flood insurance study done since the time that those buildings were constructed. They're still showing them to be in the flood zone. The only difference is that there is now a base flood that has been determined and set by FEMA for them. Now, I can't speak on behalf of what happened at the time whenever, the cinemas went in, when Bill Minsker's went in, when the auto place went in. All I can speak about is what's going on right now. And, the rules, the regulations from FEMA is that you have to get permission from FEMA to fill. Now, I will contradict what Mr. Holmes is saying, because if anybody goes out there right now and looks at that property, all of the land around the pond is what has the fill on it. There hasn't been a drop of dirt put in that pond.
That's because you stopped us before it went in.
Okay, we sent a letter back in July of 2013 asking them to comply with the rules and regulations of the local government, which is to get a building permit for any site development. And then in regards to that, because it is determined to be in a flood zone, they would also need to get a flood zone permit. I have not heard anything up until yesterday whenever I returned to work on any of this at all. So at this point in time, there has not been any contact made to the county commission whatsoever for this property. I had no idea what was going on. So we did send a cease and desist letter until the required documentation was received either from FEMA and or the landowner. I have asked for a copy just this morning from Mr. Holmes of the permit that was granted back in the 90s. That's not going to do us really any good, but I would still like to get a copy of that if the intention is still to fill out there. Since then, in July 23rd of 2013, I visited the site and took pictures. The cease and desist letter was sent out. They signed for it in August of 2013. So since that time, they know that they were not supposed to do any fill. I visited the site yesterday, and a bunch more dirt has gone on that property since the cease and desist letter was sent out. So you didn't comply with the cease and desist letter, and the fact that you didn't come in and provide any of the documentation or the required paperwork that we need in order to issue a permit. And two, you've also done additional dumping of dirt in that property since that initial letter went out.
There's a storing of...
That's a huge concern for me, and it should be a huge concern for the county commission, because I understand what Mr. Holmes is saying, that, the maps could be wrong. They could be. I have no authority to say that they're wrong. It has to come from FEMA. That's the reason that it's the burden of the proof to come from the property owners that shows that they've done the insurance studies. They've done the proof that, the water is not going to be affected. If it raises, the adjacent property owners are not going to be affected. And by doing that, by continuing to fill, you're affecting every single piece of property that's in Upshur County that is in the flood zone the possibility of being able to build because you're gonna ruin the chance of being able to get insurance. So it's a huge concern that I have as the floodplain manager for the county. So I think in that fact, the county needs to be concerned with it,
Question for you.
certainly.
If you're filling in a pond and making it level, which I take they're gonna do, and
I guess they're gonna do it after they raise the rest of the property, then they're gonna raise the pond underneath
what
that.
changes the
No.
floodplain there? I mean, if it's level, whether it's full of water or whether it's not, or it's level with dirt, what makes the difference on the floodplain? And if that's a problem out there, then it looks to me like Bill Minsker, Jenkins, the cinema, and everybody's in the floodplain.
Right.
including the sewer station for the city of Buchanan would be in the floodplain, which it can't by law be.
I mean, I understand, and we want to be right here as a county commission, you know what I mean? But it looks to me like if you have a pond there, which is filled up, if you fill it up with dirt and it's the same size, it doesn't look to me like it's gonna be any worse, to me, than anything else sitting out there.
Anytime you fill an area, you're displacing that water to somewhere else. That's the concern.
The problem is that pond is constructed to catch runoff from that whole 40-some acres that was being developed. That was the reason for the pond. It was mandated by EPA, by the federal EPA. We had to build that pond. We didn't. Maple Moss did. We had to maintain it up until the permit was completed. At that point, it was not Maple Moss anymore. It was Delta West. Well, we didn't want to buy dirt and fill that pond. There was no reason to do that at that point. We've been given that dirt. Part of it came from the city, part came from the state, and part came from a private landowner. And the dirt is stacked out there in piles. It's not all been spread. Some of it was spread early on in an area that was right along the road going into the theater. But we stopped filling the pond. Nothing's been pushed in the pond. There's dirt stacked on that property, but it's not been pushed, not been compacted, and not been filled. And we have no intention of building on that piece of property. FEMA's only, as I understand it, FEMA's responsibility is going to be for the flood insurance for someone that does build. And whoever does build on that will have to get the flood insurance designation to prove that the property is, the building is outside of the flood elevation to either not have to have insurance or have to acquire flood insurance.
Well, the insurance Terry Joe's talking about is if we don't comply with FEMA's requirement, excuse me, of building in the floodplain area, and we don't comply with that, then all the residents of Upshur County have the potential of losing their flood insurance. That's where we're under the gun as a county commission.
That's the stick that FEMA holds
Right.
over us.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I understand that. I mean, and you can build in the floodplain, just like has happened here. There's just certain requirements you have to.
Well, I understand that.
And now, are you saying that when originally in the 90s, when they got that, as part of that study that was done, that there was granted permission, this corporation was granted permission to fill that after, and that's in that documentation?
If you, yeah, it'll be in the permit itself. And I don't, as I said, I don't have a copy of that. Dave does. It's at his, I assume it's at his house. And of course, he's in Florida. If you look at that property, there's a dike all the way around that pond. And that dike was required to be above the 500-year floodplain when it was constructed. And it goes all the way around that pond. In fact, it goes all the way to the edge of Bill Minsker's property. And right on the north side of that area of the pond, and from the back from Brushy Fork all the way up to the back of Bill Minsker's lot, right on the other side of that, on the north side, is that one little crescent-shaped area of wetlands that we were not, that Maple Moss was not granted the permission to fill under that original permit. We let the permit expire, but we have to fill the pond to comply with the original permit requirements.
That EPA does it.
Right. That's all we want to do is fill that pond. The rest of it was already taken care of and is already above floodplain elevation anyway.
Except the pond, and it's still in the...
No, the pond is, the dike around the pond is.
But how about the pond itself?
The pond itself is probably below, but it doesn't get any flood water because it's protected by the dike.
Well, that's true, but there's the potential for surface water.
From,
Well, what's in there 40 acres that drains into that?
oh, it doesn't go into that pond anymore. Each as those lots were developed, their drainage was developed to divert it and put it into Brushy Fork.
You started to say something.
There's no water going into that pond anymore. It's just stagnant water laying there on the ground. And when you get rain, it fills up a little bit more. But there's on the west side, up against Minster, there is a drainage ditch that takes care of Mike Ross's property, part of the property that we used to own that is now owned by Bennett and the guys that own the steakhouse.
Yeah.
And then the theater. Their water doesn't go into that ditch, but everything above does. Part of Minster's drains into that ditch, and that goes directly down into Fink's Run. Doesn't even go into Brushy Fork, it goes into Fink's Run.
You started to say something, Terry Jo.
I was wanting to respond to Mr. Brady's question that he asked about filling in a pond, even though it would be in the flood zone. And I perfectly understand what you're saying, and I would totally agree with you. But because there's never been a building permit applied for, we had no idea until today that that's what the supposed work was just to fill in the pond. Again, I ask you guys to go out and take a look at the property. There is a bunch more dirt out there.
There is.
To me, it seems like the intent is they're going to fill the property, raise the property level. To me, it looks like probably about 4 foot. And then they're going to fill the pond.
What
So
basis do you?
the purpose of asking the question, can you just fill the pond to the current level of the ground? Sure, you could have, but we didn't know that was the intent. But now they've dumped dirt in there back in the summer, and now they've dumped additional dirt in there since.
Actually, we didn't dump any of the
exists.
dirt.
So
but-
again, that's the thing that I'm saying that I'm concerned with. They're filling the property without the required paperwork and documentation from FEMA to do so. That's my concern.
There's no sense arguing with her. One, I don't think she's an engineer unless someone has done the engineering. She
And
doesn't. She doesn't know if it's a.
In my office, I'm not an engineer. That's the reason FEMA has to approve it, and you have to get an engineer study done.
My point.
I said that exact same thing. I have no knowledge, no signature, no stamp of approval that says I'm an engineer and that the fill they're doing is going to adversely affect any other property owners. That's the work of an engineer to do, and that's what I asked for, and I was told I was not going to get one.
You were told that this morning, and I was a little bit hot when I said it. For one, I don't think you're qualified to make the statements you've made. Number one. Number two, if I provide you with a copy of that permit that shows what we were allowed to do or what Maple Moss was allowed to do, and we inherited when we bought that from Maple Moss, all we want to do is fill that pond, be done with the pond, get rid of the stagnant water that's not going anywhere. And eventually, if somebody wants to buy that, they'll have to do the permitting to prove that they're out of the floodplain. They'll have to do additional fill to bring it up to a level that they can build on. They'll have to compact it. We're not building anything on it. We're just merely going to take that dirt that was already on that piece of property for years, and it was shoved down and toward the pond. That pond used to go a lot further than it does now. It was a lot bigger. It went almost better than halfway up toward Minster's property from the Brushy Fork, from the creek. And gradually that's been filled over the years, just pushed in as the dirt was available. We haven't done anything until just this past year, where people were bringing excess dirt and we're going to use it to finally fill the pond because we didn't have to pay to truck it. It's gotten expensive to truck.
With regard to her observation that in her opinion, again, recognizing she's not an engineer, that the dirt there would raise the level of, I guess, the entire property is what you're saying, 4 feet. Is that accurate?
No, that's not even close. That property, the part of that property has 13 foot of fill on it. What we're talking about was already filled when Maple Moss did the original work above the floodplain. It was already above the floodplain. That map as you can see, doesn't depict anything that's real out there.
That's the reason for an engineer study. You can't go by just the map alone. The engineers will come out and determine what the base flood elevation is, what the current level of the elevation is of the ground, how much fill is planning on going in there, how that's going to adversely affect the water, the channel of the water flow. That's what the purpose of an engineering study is. Then that is submitted to FEMA. They okay it, say, sure, you can go ahead and fill that because we agree it's not going to adversely affect anybody.
When the FEMA regulations currently in place were initiated, was there a grandfather clause
No.
within the legislation or within the statute that went back and allowed pre-existing permits that were in existence at that time to be complied with, like filling the pond under the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, I think you indicated?
There are state regulations that you have to comply with per state rules and regulations, but then there's also local regulations. The state can't tell us what to do locally, just as we can't tell the state what to do on their end. FEMA is the one who controls all of us, per se. So, you know, there's no grandfather clause of just because there was a permit that was granted in 1990s, that complies with what happens today.
Well, if you get a copy of that original,
We'll get a copy of the permit for you.
and let me ask you this, just supposing that in that original engineering study, if it said that once this project's done, then that pond could be filled and there would be no effect, would that serve the purpose? If it was in that original study, it said, okay, after all this, we're saying in the engineering study that they can fill these areas that's been filled in that 40 acres. And at the end of that time period, then that pond can be filled in and it won't impact anything, then would that suffice?
It would not.
It wouldn't.
It would be the exact same scenario that you have with Mr. Marks out at Saul's Run. He was granted a permit by the DEP to refill that pond. He's filling in the flood zone. So we stopped him from doing that until he gets the required documentation from FEMA. You have to comply with FEMA's rules and regulations as of today.
Here's my problem, and I can't.
Have that documentation, sure, I would love to get a copy of it. Even the ordinance on the county says that we want a copy of that for our file. But you still need to comply with what the rules are today, which is you have to get a conditional letter of map amendment from FEMA to do any fill. Now, you know, I think the county would want to work with you. You know, if all you're going to do is bring that current level of the water, you know, do away with the pond and not do any additional fill. Is that a small enough a portion to be able to work with somebody? Sure, but that's not what has happened, Donnie. There's been a bunch more fill that has gone in out there around that pond.
No, there's no fill around that pond. There's fill on the north side of that pond, but it's not fill, it's dirt being stacked. It's not being spread, it's not being compacted. There is dirt on the ground, that's true. There are piles of dirt that have been dumped there, and there'll be some more coming from the state. They need a place to put it for one of the projects they're doing, and they're going to put it on that lot. That doesn't mean it's being filled or spread.
Is that from the National Guard Armory, do you know?
I'm not sure. I didn't have anything to do with that. CJ was the one that was contacted about
Original
that.
pictures that were taken on July 23rd, 2013 of the fill that went in there that had been spread.
Now this area here, then, is this adjacent to the pond?
It is.
This area, you see what the picture is?
Pond is right directly in behind this
This
dirt.
indicates that there's soil that's been dumped and spread.
This is the dike I was talking about back here.
Right,
The pond is over here.
right,
All of
Pond's
this
right
drainage
behind
was
this.
going this way and into that pond.
right.
You
These are all from
can't take care of the
20.
pond if you
23rd of
don't
July.
fill the channel that was supposed that it at one point had been dumped in the water into that pond. So the dirt was stacked out there and then spread back and then toward the pond, and that's when the.
These were
letter
taken
came about.
yesterday.
Right.
And since then, there have been piles of dirt placed on that property. They've not been spread, it's not been put in the pond.
This was after the cease and desist letter went out of not doing any additional work out there, and this is what's there now. This was taken yesterday.
This was.
These are, yes.
And nothing's been put in the pond.
And there's no dirt at all in the pond.
We've not put any dirt in the pond. And we didn't put that dirt on the site, technically. I mean, we didn't haul it there and put it there in direct violation.
Here's the pond.
Yeah.
Look how low the pond is compared to how much dirt's been added in there.
Why don't you guys take it right out there and look? It'd be a lot easier than trying to go from those pictures.
And I know this picture is extremely hard to see. This is the ground level here. Look at the difference here. I walked out there, it's up to my waist.
Oh, you can see the difference there.
How deep
You
is
know
the
what I mean?
pond, Steve?
Pardon me?
How deep is the pond?
From
Just
on the
generally
theater side, the back side, and, well, let me borrow these pictures.
On the back of
The
it.
pond has hardly no water in it at all. But if you've got this would be out where the Finch Run is and Brushy Fork is back here. And that dike here is like this, comes across, there's a road that goes between the back of the pond and Brushy Fork that goes out and services that well that's located way up here behind Minsker. That pond is down in this corner right here. And then the drainage used to come down and come into that pond that way. The theater property is right here. Right here's the theater.
Right.
And that, down at this end, you're probably 4 feet from the bottom of the pond to the top of the dike. Up here, it's probably 3 feet. But that's to the wall of the pond, not to the level of the water. There's probably not 6 inches to 8 inches of water in it anymore. At one time, it used to fill pretty well and then drain into the creek. And it does not drain into the creek anymore. So. And those stacks, the dirt she's talking about, has been stacked all the way through here. Not quite up as far as Minsker. And the original piles that were put this way and shoved back this way toward that dike to stop this area of drainage from getting into the pond.
So that area was filled, was raised.
Pardon me?
That area was filled and raised that you're pointing to there.
The back part, this back portion
Right.
here
Right.
had fill taken this way
Right.
in to
And-
take it so it could get it to the pond. You just can't dump it in the pond because then all that stuff's
Right.
gonna come this way.
Right.
So you've got to fill this way to fill the pond.
And how far is this rick of dirt? I assume they just backed in and dumped in the
I
back.
can't see that yet.
You say it comes almost up to Minskers?
Well, Minsker is up here.
Right,
The road is, I guess there's the edge of the pavement for the theater,
right.
and this has been stacked this way.
Uh-huh.
Coming in, Minsker's right here, that's his
Right.
fence. It doesn't go up to Minsker.
Goes up
He
toward.
filled that whole area right there when he bought it.
Right,
That 1 acre, it's a 1 acre stretch right there he bought. And there's a ditch between that fence and here that takes it out to the Finch Run.
so, and the intent is to take that whole rick of dirt and put it in the pond.
It's all to go to the pond.
It's not gonna fill any more around the pond.
No, it doesn't need to, it's out of the floodplain already.
But I mean, to keep, you don't need to fill any more above the pond where you
It's
put it
just pulled
in.
away.
You've already filled that enough above the pond, so we can't run back up.
Right.
Okay. Well, so basically, in order for them to comply with FEMA's requirements, do you understand what FEMA's saying you need to do?
I understand what FEMA's doing, but I don't, can you take a look, where's your big map again? So, what we're saying is that all of that blue is now floodplain. In 2010, they decided that was floodplain. How did they decide that?
Well, there's a map
There's a map based on.
that FEMA has.
Yeah, from what? That's my point.
Well,
That area is not in the floodplain.
Well, and you know what, there are areas that FEMA says is in the floodplain. That aren't, and you know what you have to do to prove it?
Well, I know what you're supposed to do to prove it,
Well, now
which is
what-
what I'm saying, that the area from that dike over,
Right,
here, by the way, if you want to know where that little wetlands, you see that little semicircle right there,
Right.
that's the wetlands.
Right, we saw that from when.
Okay, we can't fill beyond that without going through the applicable permits. Don't even want to attempt it. because the permit has expired. They had the right to fill, but part of that was to replace that wetlands. They never did tell Maple Moss how many acres they would have to replace.
They being the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection,
That in the,
EPA.
who's Paul Wolf? You remember who he worked for?
DNR?
Stanley Wolf.
Huh?
Huh?
Stanley Wolf.
Stanley? Is that the?
DEP.
DEP, Environmental Protection.
Right. He's the one that handled that originally
Right.
for Maple Moss.
Right.
When that permit was being complied with, or taken care of. So, didn't go past the extent of that original permit and are only just trying to fill the pond. With that pond, as I said, used to go almost all the way to Minster's. And over the years, we've gradually, as people have gotten extra dirt, we've gone ahead and filled that. Been doing it for 13, 14 years now. And just want to fill the pond and be done with it.
And I don't think that's a problem as long as you get the required permit to do so at this point in time.
I don't see any real problem with getting a permit if the determination hadn't been done before that it wasn't in the floodplain. I should not have to re-comply when we've already complied once that it was out of the floodplain.
And if it's been determined that it's out of the floodplain, then FEMA would have issued a letter of map amendment that they took it out.
They didn't do that with any of the stuff that's there already, including the theater and Minskers. They didn't do it, they don't do it. They never do it.
We're not talking about what somebody else did, we're talking about this particular property, and
That
if you're
is that
saying
particular property,
Okay, but if
Terry.
you're saying that that's been taken out of the floodplain, then you should have documentation that shows that. That's what we're asking for. If you do have the seed, then this whole point is a moot point, because then you can fill and there would be no problem. I just would like to have that documentation.
That's not what you said. You said it would not matter. What you said, it wouldn't matter because it wouldn't comply now. What I'm saying to you is if we got permission of Maple
The
Moss,
DEP permit is what I'm saying wouldn't matter now.
If you have proof that it, from FEMA, that it's not in the floodplain, do you have that?
I don't think FEMA was involved back then.
So then
But
FEMA's
we
never
had to
taken
fill it
out.
above the existing flood level, which was established back then. Well, they couldn't have filled all that 30-some acres.
Well, but my understanding on that is, back when that was done, there had to be an engineering study done,
Right.
saying that this is the floodplain, if we fill this much, and they determine this is how much fill and how much height and how much area, that it's not going to adversely affect the neighbors.
That's what was done with the original permit. I shouldn't have to do it again.
Well, why don't you get a copy of that original permit so we can look at it,
I will.
okay?
But you're saying that even if he has a copy, that does not, did I understand you earlier to say that even if the original permit contains an engineering study that says this, that, you know, that satisfies his requirements, it would not satisfy your requirements?
If there's an
Currently.
original insurance or a study done by an engineer that says that the fill that they're gonna do there is not gonna adversely affect the property owners,
Right.
that needs to be submitted to FEMA to get the conditional letter of map amendment.
So the mere fact
So
he
we
had
still need
that,
to comply with FEMA's rules of the conditional letter of map amendment. He wouldn't have to turn around and get another insurance study done or another,
Right.
H&H study done if that's in the original permit.
he would just have to take that original permit information or engineering information, provide it to FEMA.
When they come back to town, I'll bring the permit in. Then who do you want me to deliver it to? You an engineer? Or
Well,
you? or-
whose responsibility is submitted to FEMA?
It would be the property owners.
So you just need to submit it to,
Oh, wait, we're back again. I mean, if I already have the permission to fill, and the elevation was established, that it was outside of the floodplain, when all of that fill was done, why am I submitting to FEMA to start over again and going through the expense that we already went through once?
there wouldn't be expense, you would just submit that documentation to FEMA. If the proof's there that it's,
Well, I don't
that
think
it's
that's
out of the
gonna be the case,
floodplain.
Donnie, I'm sorry. Then I'm gonna have to hire an engineer and have him come out and do an elevation study again, when that was already done in the original permit. They shouldn't be amending a map, it should have already been done when that original fill was done.
What?
None of that stuff you see in the floodplain should be in the floodplain. It shouldn't be there.
Well, now,
It's not in the floodplain.
okay, let me ask Terry Jo, in a situation like this, where the proper engineering study's done, and says, okay, you can fill this much area this high, and it's okay to do that. Then after that's done, then what is required by who in order to get it put on the map that it's not in the floodplain now?
What does FEMA
What's the
require?
requirement? How's that work?
Okay, FEMA, you submit to FEMA a letter of map amendment. I have some in my office that I can show you if you need me to actually give you a visual, where somebody has gone in and had an elevation certificate done of their property that says the school, the Hodgesville grade school is the perfect example. They submitted, their building is in the floodplain. They wanted to do all that renovation work down there a year or two ago. We wouldn't let them until they got permission from FEMA that they could do that. FEMA sent them a letter of map amendment. That letter of map amendment is like the gospel, if you will. They're not going to go in and change a map. They're just going to give you that letter of map amendment that says that they're taking the building out, they're taking the property out. They'll actually specifically say what is no longer to be determined to be in the flood zone.
But they don't.
I think we're getting confused a little bit of permits, what's required from the state to get a permit and what's required from FEMA to get approval to actually fill. There's a fine line there that the original permit that was applied for was through the state to be able to do that work out there. From what Mr. Holmes has said, there has never been anything submitted to FEMA.
I'm sorry, I don't know that. Everything was done by MSCS consultants out of Clarksburg. Not for us, for Maple Moss.
But FEMA is the only one who can take a piece of property out of the flood zone. So by saying that it's not in the flood zone and you have permission to fill that, it's kind of misguiding, I think, the commission and maybe the general public. FEMA is the only one that can actually do that. An H&H analysis can determine, a study done by an engineer can determine that the fill is not going to adversely affect any adjacent property owners, which is the concern for the county. But then that has to be submitted to FEMA through a conditional letter of map amendment.
Okay, if the original engineering study, H&H, shows that that is the case, will FEMA accept that as proof or as justification to remove this from the floodplain, as you've stated?
Are we talking about?
I can't speak on behalf of FEMA by no
Sure.
means. I know Mr. Marks out at Thanks Run, his engineering study was done like 10 years ago. That's the documentation that he has submitted to FEMA to get his conditional letter of map amendment. It does say in that H&H study that it's not going to adversely affect the property owners, but the amount of fill that he's putting in there over that large span of property is not going to affect the waterway.
Has FEMA given him his?
Not yet.
How long does it take? How long ago did he submit that to FEMA?
Well, he submitted it back, I'm thinking like toward the end of last year, beginning of this year, and then they didn't have all the documentation filled out that they needed to. And the last conversation that I had with the son, Mr. Marks, was about a month ago, I guess it was. And they were at that point, they'd had conversation back and forth with FEMA a couple different times, and they were just waiting on a response. So, I think if you submit a full package, I don't know necessarily how long it takes.
It's been about a year for them in
Yes.
processing.
Yes.
And the cease and desist order came from the county. Is that correct? From you?
Right.
It came from me on behalf of the county, yes.
Didn't come from FEMA.
No, it comes from the county. We're the ones that's in charge of regulating any development in a floodplain. The county is the sole responsible person.
To comply with FEMA's
As
requirements.
long as the elevation study was done during that permitting process, which it was. The one time I had seen it, it's been a long time, it's been before we ever bought it, before I ever got involved with Delta West. It determined how much change there would be in the entire floodplain, how much it would raise the water. And if they filled that entire acreage, and at that time it was less than 2 inches. Total impact would have been less than 2 inches. Now, all of that fill's been done in place for 14, 15 or more years. I don't know when Maple Moss actually did the original fill. That came off that hill across the street, a lot of it, most of that's where that came from. That was the old McNeemer farmer, something like that. But that study was done by MSCS consultants. And that's when we identified the one area of wetlands, or when they did. When I say we, I wasn't involved back then. That's when it was established. And that's when the pond was designed. And the pond could not have been designed within the floodplain. It was after 1985, so we knew where the flood, we all know where that flood went back then. And since then, we've had how many events? 91, 93, a few others. And no water's ever gotten up on any of that.
Well, get a copy of that
I'll
report,
get your copy from it.
and then we can see from there.
And I'll make this statement too, because I think it's patently unfair, not only in this county, but any other county, where there's already existing buildings involved, that because the new map came out, based on old topographic information, that didn't even take into account any previous fill, the people now have to prove again and pay to prove again that their property isn't gonna flood. You know, now you have to go get a base elevation study done by an engineer or surveyor to prove something you already know and has already been done before. Just because the map is wrong. And it's based on 1969 in some cases, sometimes 1970s technology.
Well, and
They know what the elevation of the water was,
right.
but they don't know what the ground has done. They haven't seen the changes that the ground has undergone.
I agree 100%.
And it's wrong.
FEMA maps are, a lot of areas are totally inaccurate, and when they update them, all they do is change the date on them. I
And
agree
that's right,
100%.
They haven't done anything else. And now
Right.
the banks are in a terrible position where they can't make that loan until they have that flood
Yep.
study done. Here comes this map, and you can see it now. For Minsker would again, if he wanted to put an addition out there, he'd have to prove again, he's not in the floodplain. And you're talking about the Hodgesville School, that building was already existing. They should not have had to prove that that building that's been there for how many years is not gonna flood anymore.
Well,
Did it sink?
I don't think it's a matter of whether it's going to flood. It's a matter of FEMA determines it's in a floodplain.
But it
Which-
was determined it was not, that the building itself was not in a floodplain before, they wouldn't have built it.
Well,
You put a
back
public
then,
building in a floodplain?
well, back then,
No.
they may have, I don't know how long that's been built, you know. But anyway, so they got an elevation certificate, and they got a, whatever it's called, that Hodgesville School did, right, saying that it's not in the
A
floodplain.
letter of map amendment is what
Okay.
it's called.
Right, letter map amendment. And it's very
By the way,
likely,
what's the fine if you go ahead and fill?
I
What's the
don't know,
fine? What do you levy?
who would have to check with EPA and FEMA and see what the fine is?
No, I don't, really.
I said we'd have to answer the question. I'm not saying you'd have
What's
to.
your fine?
Well, our fine is what FEMA, we're all, the biggest problem that would cause us would be the possibility of everybody in Upshur County that has flood insurance would lose it. That's the stick they use on the county commission. And that's the whole purpose of the building permit system, is that anytime there's construction, fill, anything like that, people need to get a $15 building permit so that we can make a determination if it is in the floodplain. And if it is,
Well,
then.
you don't make the determination, you say, we've got to make the determination. You don't make it, we have to make it, which means we got to prove what we already proved once. That's my whole point.
Okay, well,
That's my entire point.
if you've already proved it once, bring your proof in.
All right, very good.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Have a good one, Steve.
Okay, so we have an appointment in Clarksburg at 10:30. So let's just go down through these real fast. We have approval of the West Virginia EMPG grant application, calendar year 2013 for emergency management program for $36,707. That's for operation of Jim's office, to help with that, right? Any comments on that, or just resubmitting and getting the money from? Okay. Anything you got, Megan? Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carried. Approval hire for 911 comm center dispatch, effective start date November 25th, $10 per hour. On page 13, list those individuals. And there are, how many did I see here?
There's 6, 3 full-time and 3 part-time.
3 full-time and 3 part-time. Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the hiring of those individuals?
So moved. I was there at that.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Reappointment Don Killingsworth to Adrian PSD Board of Directors.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Approval of Lewis Upshur Animal Control Facility volunteer Samara Kendrick.
And we do have all of that paperwork.
Got all the paperwork. Motion approved.
So moved.
I'll second.
All in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign, motion carries. We have correspondence from the Department of Military Affairs, Public Safety, on-site visit for grant number 10-SHS-59. What is that for?
That is just an FYI, they came to visit, and I believe that was also your facilities, that was your grant, I believe.
Yeah, that was the grant for radio.
Yeah, and
Okay.
everything looks great.
Okay,
So
good.
that's just notification that everything went well.
Very good. Next is approval community participation grant for literacy volunteers, amount of $2,000.
And I'm sorry, that's not actually approval, that's just notification that they sent the signed contract back.
Oh,
So you don't have to
okay.
do anything on that, it's just, yeah,
Approval of the same contract.
yes.
Okay, and the rest is agendas and notice of meetings and all those good things, so.
We are going to have to work on some board appointments, particularly for the Parks and Recreation Board.
And we are in the process of trying to figure out everything we need, and hopefully, since
Right.
the new year is usually when a lot more crop up, I'll
Right.
have an updated list of all of those.
And on the Fire Board, we need a citizen
Correct.
for District 1, Magistrate District, I believe, which would encompass the city primarily.
And we still need someone on the health board, don't we? Don't we?
Health Board, I believe the Farmland Protection Board still has one.
Right.
Fire Board.
So,
Does that person from the Health Board have to be from Washington District?
oh, it's very complicated.
Is it?
Yeah, it's, has to do with political parties in the area they live in and, you know, which side you comb your hair over and what color your hair is. And, I mean, we thought we had somebody and then it seemed like it didn't meet the criteria because it says you can't have more from one party.
When it comes to health, I don't think you should have a political concern, quite frankly.
Well, but I think back in those days, apparently.
Back
they
in those
wanted-
days.
Well, it's kind of like, but it's kind of like county commission. You know, you're required to live in a certain district, even though you serve the whole county. So, I mean, they put those in place, I think back when the world was smaller and you had your communities and they wanted to make sure that this area of the county was represented, and that everybody wasn't elected from Buchanan and us Hill folks didn't get represented. I think that's
But I think I'm concerned with it, but I understand.
Yeah.
But ideally, you have a political affiliation on the Health Board. It just seems rather antiquated to me.
Well, until you get to Mingo County, then maybe it doesn't. Okay, well, we will recess, and then we'll come back and, do we have,
We do, you have bills
Yeah.
to pay, so we'll have to come back.
okay, yeah, because we need to get moving. We've got 25 minutes to get started.